So, are we allowed to think aloud here?
Yes.
Yes, yes, you're allowed to think as aloud as you can.
He's
I
right.
want to read you a quote from your Facebook page that had me. It was about nuclear families. And I talked to, so you said it's about time we dismantle the tyrannical system of the nuclear family. I would even go one step further. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Is
That's
this
a
okay?
that's a post.
Are you, so I
That's a
should,
troll post.
that's not true?
No, it's not true. That's a troll thing, but we can talk about that.
Okay,
We
okay.
can talk about that.
So should I now read the rest of this?
Go ahead and read the rest of it,
Okay,
so
okay.
people have a context for it, you know. But like, to be honest, there's some certain times, like if you look at the comments in some of these, a lot of my friends know that like I'm trolling. It's usually in response to something that somebody
This is a
else
really
said.
intelligent troll. Like this is, you used a lot of, okay.
Yeah.
So I would even go one step further in declaring it an imperative that we abolish it by any means necessary. Besides the fact that family structures and any kind of arrangement are outdated modes of agrarian patriarchal control,
Yeah, man.
the socialized roles of fathers and mothers are artificial redundancies.
Yeah.
We must end the nuclear family if we are to be rid of the ills that plague us socially, economically, and politically. I can totally see how
Amen.
this is a troll.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Okay.
No, it's a troll post. It's a troll post. You know, the thing is that you come across these Facebook posts sometimes where people are making statements that are just like they're hilarious if you really kind of like think about it like deeply, right? And so what I do is I'll write something like this, right? Just kind of make it sound a little bit more like academic jargon and just post it out there just to kind of see like, you know, who likes it. Sometimes you get people that say like, yeah, I agree with you, right? And I'm like, okay, now I know like, you know, where you stand on certain issues, right? But then there's other people who just say, you know, like, that's so funny, man, that like I thought that was ridiculous, haha, like, or they'll kind of add something to it, right? This one specifically, I think the thing is, man, like our like we exist in a world where there's like hierarchical power structures, right? We do, like, there's no way to get away from that, right?
It's the reality of every situation.
It's a reality of every situation. You're gonna
Right.
have like power structures in every single situation, right? Like there's certain ways that you're like right now, right? Like as a person who's hosting this or whatever, that you tell me how I like move this thing or whatever. There's power like that you hold, right? And there's power that like I hold as a person that you're interviewing, right? Like there's power that like that we hold in different places, right? There's always like hierarchies that shift and you know there's an ebb and flow of power hierarchies between any two given people. I think the thing is, as a society, we've gotten to this point where we think that like that things that are social constructs are necessarily bad, right? Or that everything is a social construct, that there aren't certain things that are just kind of innate to us as human beings or that are like fundamental to like human existence. And power hierarchy is fundamental to human existence. There is no possible way that you can get 100% equal across the board power structures for everybody, because that means that like nobody disagrees, right? Nobody disagrees. As soon as I disagree with you and I like recruit somebody else, I recruit you to like help me out, right? Now like I have more power than you, right? And so how can we possibly have any disagreement in a society without having some kind of like power imbalance? There's just no way. And so I think this kind of stuff is sometimes like sounds good. It's like I guess it makes people feel happy. And sometimes for people that are disenfranchised or perhaps have it really rough, right? Like minority communities or people that, you know, people that are
It comes out
struggling.
of
Like,
academic circles, though. It doesn't come out of the...
because the thing is that like you can literally say a lot of things in academic circles. Sometimes there's things that are published that are just complete garbage, right? Like just complete garbage. Like they don't make sense, right? And somehow like somebody finds it interesting and decides to go with it. Unfortunately, like the way that academia has kind of gone is that controversy seems to win, right? Like if I can make slightly more controversial statements, I can like, you know, I'll get a following as a result, right? If I can kind of like buck the trend, if I can like, you know, if I can show that I'm different from everybody else and that like I have something unique to say, or I can point fingers at somebody and like and say that person is like wronged me, or perhaps is like that person's thought is the source of all of our ills in society, or that group of people's thought is the source of all of our ills. That's a lot of power, and like in people kind of what you've seen, especially when it comes to like, let's say for example, discussions on like feminism, right? Homosexuality, right? a lot of these like discussions that are being had today, and the kind of like liberal discourse that exists comes from the academy. Like these are articles that were written in like 1980s, right? They were written in 1980s, and for the most part, like nobody was really reading them or anything like that. But like in the early 2000s, people are discovering these articles. They're finding like good points to make. They're learning. They're first of all they're being assigned in courses, university courses. So students are reading them. They're getting influence as a result. And so now when they go out there, they have this language in their back pocket. So when they're fighting the good fight, against like social injustice, they bring these like issues up and they start using the jargon. They start talking about like intersectionality, right? Like which comes from an article. If I'm not mistaken, I remember doing this research like a few years ago. But this stuff, you find it in an article, like in the 1980s, right? You find it in an article, which is kind of an article that exists in one of these journals, and it gets massive popularity after 20, 30 years. And so this is, I think that's one of the things that sometimes you'll find on my Facebook post, like my Facebook wall, is that I'm kind of making these like jokes about these kinds of discussions, because I think sometimes it's helpful with humor to realize how absurd certain statements are.
And it's a deep, deep subject, man. It's something that keeps me up at night sometimes, literally, just because it drives me insane to think about. First of all, just like as you were saying, with choice comes hierarchy. With just society comes hierarchy. You even look at animals. There's a hierarchical structure just by nature. And going back to the academic things, the problem is that a lot of these academics stay in their idealistic world because they're not dealing with the real world. They're not dealing with hierarchical structures that are absolute, apparent, necessary. And so they come up with these articles and these academic statements. And the thing that happens is that now these children, now these college students that aren't nearly as educated as some of these academics are taking this information, and now they can hold it against you because they have Princeton behind them. They have WHO behind them. They have all these organizations that are supposed to be non-biased, supposed to be just saying the truth no matter what the truth is. But really at some point they are biased towards the liberal agenda, which is leaning more and more left. And they're coming out with these things that are just absolutely absurd, like social, like you were saying, like everything's a social construct. Well, by definition, everything's a social construct. Really, if you're gonna say that, why is this computer a computer? It could be a TV. Why is this TV a TV? Why are you a human? Why can't you? And that's actually what we're getting to. It's like, you can be an animal. You can, and if you're an animal, can I shoot you? Can I? If I run over you, do you have human rights?
Well, the thing is, like, then you have like the vegan movement, right? So then you have like the animal rights movement and the vegan movement in terms of how we treat animals, which I like. To be honest, there's a lot of really good stuff that comes out of. I don't want to kind of make it seem as if there hasn't been good stuff that comes from leftist movements, right? But I think the thing is that, like, just like any movement, leftist or like right-leaning movements, you have people get crazy. Like sometimes people get a little too like carried away with their ideology, and they don't realize that there are certain bounds that you have, like logical bounds that you have to kind of restrict yourself to, and I think that's. This social structures thing, there are people that are arguing against the notion of like the family structure, right? Like the nuclear, and that's part of what I was talking about in that post. Is there are people who are arguing that like it doesn't make sense to have like the concept of marriage is unfair. It's like it's an unequal, unfair distribution of power, right? And not only that, but it reinforces patriarchal stereotypes, right? Like patriarchal archetypes of the man and the woman being together, and the husband having more power than the wife, right? Even if we think about it, like somebody could do this. I don't know if somebody's done this, but what do we call like taking care of animals? We call it husbandry, right? Like husbandry, right? So like now you use that term husband to refer to the husband, to the male in the relationship. What is he doing? He's taking care of the wife and taking care of his children, right? In the same way that you take care of animals, right? There's kind of like this hierarchy, right? That's I can just think of somebody making that argument, right? Just taking a word that has a similar connotation, perhaps even sounds the exact same. You just take it from one context to the other context, right?
And like the sexist, systemic sexism within our language.
Yeah, exactly.
They would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can do that kind of stuff, right? It's possible for a person to do that, and you get like even further down. You say like, well, this kind of uh, uh, that like this comes from agrarian societies. We needed this kind of like a union between a man and a woman in agrarian societies early on, but now we're a post-agrarian society. We
What's
don't
an
really need that.
agrarian society?
Agrarian societies are societies that live off of agriculture, right? So that live
Okay.
off of the land, right? So we're a post-agrarian society. We don't live off of much of human history, by the way, has been agrarian. Like people needed the land in order for them to survive, right?
We're still like that for the most
To
part.
some
We
to
just-
some degree, but we actually like manufacture a lot of like our foods and stuff, right? So we can.
But at the end of the day, it comes from the ground.
Yeah. But this is
Yeah.
different, right? This is different. Like in terms of the majority of like economic activity being agrarian, like it's much.
Okay.
That's what we
I
mean.
see what
We're
you mean.
post that, right?
Okay.
So we are. In that context, the person could say, "Well, we no longer need that, so we can get rid of this family unit and this family structure, right?" And that's not like really new, right? Like reorienting family structure is not new. Like Plato talks about this in the Republic. He talks about basically having a society where people aren't kind of like bound to each other; they're bound to the state, right? And so you're kind of like an object of the state. You're an object for the life of the state. So you are, or for the Republic, you, like women, are kind of like a shared commodity in society. Children are shared commodity in society. And men have specific like roles and responsibilities as well. But there isn't this like notion, like a real notion of a nuclear family as we have it today. So there's nothing like really new under the sun in terms of like arguing against these kinds of structures, right? People have argued against them for other reasons in the past. The question is that just because something is like a social structure, or perhaps has worked for us in the past, shouldn't that why doesn't that indicate that like some sense of stability, right? Like that there's some sense of stability in that, and I'm not saying this for all things, right? Like a person can say, well, like there was slavery for a long period of time, and so like why doesn't that indicate some kind of stability for society? I'm not arguing that. Obviously, we live in a stable society without slavery. We've done it, right? But there's something that's like fundamental to this notion that like you have like reproduction and like in family and children growing up. There's been studies in terms of even when people talk about same-sex couples, they talk about like, is it possible for the children to have like a proper upbringing in like same-sex households? Like, are there mental health issues that arise as a result, right? And these are long-term studies, right? So, or they're going to be long-term studies. We're doing this. We're engaging in a long-term experiment right now, right? In terms of the way the society is shifting. I think these are the kinds of the reason why the question is asked is because we recognize that having that kind of like family structure is important for the upbringing of children, and it's important for children to feel safe and to feel loved. But you don't necessarily need that all the time. Like the Prophet ﷺ didn't live with, like his mother and father passed away, right? Before he was like his mother, at least before he was 6 years old, right? At different reports or whatever. But like he was an orphan from a very young age, and his grandfather passed away. And then he lived with his uncle, and his uncle passed away when he was older, right? So the Prophet is like an example of somebody who, you can have orphans in the world who don't have like their parents or perhaps aren't attached to their parents, and they can do fairly like well. But is that the norm, right? And you have to have like a society where people are taking care of each other, and you have external family, right? Like extended relationships. But in a world like today, and like in our Western society, where unless you're come from let's say an ethnic background or whatever, right, or you're like from a minority background or a second generation immigrant family or third generation immigrant family or less, a lot of people like don't spend time with their extended family, right? And so like it's just you and your wife, and then maybe you see your parents on on occasions or whatever it is. Who's gonna raise a child in an environment where it's like both parents are doing their own thing and the children are like kind of coming back and forth between the family? There isn't like a sense of stability, and it's kind of like a long rant, but I think that's kind of one of the challenges, and people make these arguments, and it's unfortunate, but I think there's a lot to say in terms of things that have worked out for human beings, like in terms of stable, like where people like think about this today. We're suffering like a massive mental health like crisis around the world, right? People are killing themselves like in crazy numbers, right? Even people people are killing themselves in crazy numbers, right? And people just don't want to live anymore. But we have like amazing technology. We have incredible economic benefits, right? we are living in like the most prosperous moment in history, and yet people don't want to live, right? You don't have that same experience like in the past. And people could say, well, maybe it's because there wasn't like reporting and stuff, right? But you would know about like mass suicides. Like it's not like suicide's a new thing. You would know about mass suicides. You'd know about like, oh shoot, like Egypt in like the 18th century, there were like lots of people committing suicide, and it just kind of spread. The word spread. But we don't have that. Like we don't really have those, and maybe it's because we don't have the records. But I just think it's because it just didn't exist. I think there's people are feeling disconnected from the things that like made us feel normal as human beings, and we're living in like kind of like a weird like wacky. I'm looking at like the Pink Floyd thing behind you, right? Like we're living in a world like that where it's just kind of like things are just bizarre, right? Like it's a bizarre experience that we're having, and we don't really know how to make the best of it.
And it comes back to the prophecy that there will come a time where a man will go pass by another man's grave and wish that he was in it.
Mm-hmm.
So